So I was trying to explain to my wife, she said, you're going to another one of your nerd shows. And I said, excuse me, I'm not a nerd, I'm a geek. And she goes, what's the difference? And I said, well, come over to the whiteboard in the kitchen and let me explain it to you. Kind of did myself in, didn't I? So this is a talk that I like to give. My voice is loud. This is a talk I love to give because I think a lot of people will go out and they'll hire somebody and they think you just occur naturally, right? So maybe if you grow up cloud native, that's great. But if you're not cloud native yet, or you weren't cloud native and you're trying to be, I like to provide that transition. So an analogy I like to use is, you know those, we're in Westport, so there's a lot of the, you know, you're in the alley like you do sometimes when you go to Westport, and you're looking at the ladders that come from the top of the building down. I like to say that this talk is to get you from the alleyway to the bottom of the ladder so you can get to the rest of the way up, okay? So I think it's an important thing to try to get folks informed as to how do you get there. So we could call this, if this was a movie, we could call this one man's journey into Sysadmin to DevOps. Now I grew up in the Sysadmin world, everything was physical, and so when we talk about what we're going to do, and just give you a quick overview of what's going on, talk about the transition as it occurred to me, take you through what to learn. Now this came out of a series of talks where people would come up and they'd say, man, I'm really trying to break into this. And I'd say, oh, well, you gotta, and then 15 minutes later, they're still writing stuff down. I'm like, well, why don't I just do a presentation on this? So I did a presentation. It was actually just a little slide deck, and I was giving it to people. And somebody emailed me and said, would you like to give this at a show? Well, maybe. They're like, don't be nervous, and I wasn't until now, you know. But that's okay. Let's take a look at it. When we talk about what we're trying to do, I lied to you. There is no real easy way. There's an easier way. And the easier way is, I don't know how you work when you learn, but I usually wade into whatever it is, and I do way too many things, and I get all confused, and I walk away with my head ringing, and then after a while, I'm like doing something else, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if I do that. Maybe that'll work, and I go back into it. 3 cycles. If you watch yourself when you learn something, for me, it takes go in, get confused, walk away, do it again, be less confused, walk away, and then finally, I start to feel like I'm gaining traction. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Okay. So, you know, why beat the hell out of yourself over it? Just own it and realize it takes 3 cycles or 4 or 5 or whatever. Okay, so the other thing is it's going to take is a certain amount of dedication. Now, how many of you have, I can't see hardly anybody, how many of you have children? All right, 10 somebody said? No. So I asked this in a crowd not too long ago, no hands went up. And I was like, I said, how many of you have seen children? Oh, well, in that case, some guy shouts from the crowd, I have child processes. Out, leave. No, nobody did /dad joke, no, done. I had to get the dad jokes for this one, okay? So, but it takes time to do this. And I always like to pepper my slides with stuff from where I live, which is in, I like to tell people I'm from South Central, Montana. And so that, thanks for laughing at that. Usually we have a moment of silence for that one. But I tell people, if you want this, you got to go after it. And I had to distill it down. I said, look, if you don't like code, if you don't like YAML, if you don't like staring at an editor, trying to figure out what you're supposed to do next and trying to figure out why something broke, I said, if you don't realize that this is more of a recipe for baking than it is doing food by taste, okay? So if you don't realize those things, and if you don't like server exhaust, don't come into this. And for God's sake, don't do it just for the money. Because nobody wants to be around your miserable self when you don't like what you're doing, but you got the golden handcuffs on, right? Anybody work with somebody like that? I saw a couple of people going like this. Okay? But you have to have a certain mindset that says, I want to build things. And so Amazon does this great thing where they refer to everybody as builders. Well, they do it way too often, so it's getting kind of old, but I like that concept. You're building stuff, okay? You're making things better for other people, unless it crashes, and then you've ruined their entire day and week and whatever. So let's talk about the transition. And like I say, this is my journey. This is my whole thing. Back in the days when my child was small and we drove to town all the time, my poor kid got to listen to all my conference calls. And we were just getting into data sciences at that point in my company. and after a very long call with somebody about the R programming language, she said, "Dad, yeah, why did you refer to yourself in that call so many times?" I'm like, thinking to myself, I'm driving along, trying not to hit deer and, you know, things like that. And I said, I didn't. And she goes, "Well, you said big data a lot." I'm like, I was like, I got to hold that thought. I got to call the wife. This is a good one. Okay, big data. Okay, let's go for that. So where do we come from? Well, if you're a certain age, you didn't have a choice. Everything was physical. All your servers were physical. We're sysadmins, system operators. I never know what to call anybody anymore. How many of you get paid? How many of you do DevOps engineer duties but get paid for something else? So they come up with all kinds of stuff. I heard one today, infrastructure, something or other engineer, IAE or something like that. That was the new one on me. SREs, that kind of thing. But remember, everything was physical, right? You didn't have anything virtual. If you had virtual, it was very early virtual PC, or had something to do with VMware or whatever. And so those very first virtual servers were like, how do we work with this? What do we do? And then, of course, change management. How many of you have been through the dreaded change management scenario, right? You know the 35-to-1 ratio, 35 pieces of paperwork for one change to the server? Yeah, that was the worst, very worst. So I always tell people you don't have to be a full-on developer. Why? Because I'm not a full-on developer. I can do some shell scripting. I can definitely do some shell scripting. But I don't necessarily like to write code, and I'm not good at it, so I've decided to spare the rest of you from my writing code. But that doesn't mean that I don't want to deal with the rest of it and I don't want to support the rest of it. I'm mostly on the training and the certification side. And so I get the best of both worlds. I had to tell people what they're supposed to do and then to test them to make sure that they were doing the thing they were supposed to do. And then when they get to their company, they say, "Forget all that crap you learned and we're going to do it this way." You ever heard that? All the time. Okay? So remember what we're doing here. We're really just taking this stuff that was on physical machines. You're turning it off into the cloud. Have you ever had that conversation with a manager who doesn't understand that there are physical machines out there somewhere running this stuff? I love that one. And they're like, no, it's in the cloud. You don't get this, do you? No. And then you have to go to the whiteboard and you have to walk them through the whole thing. And they're like, "Oh, it's really physical." No, it's in the cloud. Stop. Just believe us, trust us. And that's a hard thing for managers to do. So it becomes a little easier to scale, especially the automation stuff. And when I was first getting into this, I was realizing that the things that we used to do over and over and over again, we could do that in a much more automated fashion. And the moment that I broke through and started to understand the concept of cookbooks, or that I could install an entire test and development environment from the same set of scripts and the same set of files and everything else, and that it would actually work the same. That was a big one for me because it was always the environmental match that was the issue when you had to deal with this stuff. So how many of you had the developers, or you be the developer, you toss the code over to the wall, and then things don't work right, and why was it? Well, it worked over here, right? Worked for me. Or Java virtual machines, write once, run somewhere, sometimes, that kind of thing. Okay, so I like it when I see people using the same environment, and it really truly is the same environment. It was done by the same set of files. Okay, so then it really matches. Okay, one thing though, when we talk about it today, you have to have your test and your dev be as close to identical as you possibly can. You want to have your infrastructure in the cloud. How many of you work for a company that has no physical server assets ever anywhere whatsoever? Oh, stop it, Waldo. There's Waldo, there he is. We found him. All right, so everything's done by cookbooks, done by YAML files. Okay, you got the sysadmin and the developer, and they've kind of merged into this thing called the DevOps engineer. But like I said, you can't necessarily get paid for that. So you get to have another title and not get paid quite as much. So let's talk about the biggest challenge for me, believing. There was a suspension of disbelief problem. And that was I looked at the things they were talking about and the problems everybody was having with Kubernetes. Excuse me. Sorry, the Kube folks. But having the problems with it, and it was difficult, and it was just so many different steps and all that, and just believing that I could run an entire infrastructure on that. But now major portions of all tech are out in the cloud and working that way. I was always concerned about this one wrong update thing. How many of you remember like the comma that ruined the internet about 15 years ago? Some poor Cisco engineer put at May East or May West or whatever, put a comma in the wrong spot, and everything went down. It was only about 100,000 hosts at that point, so, you know, didn't really matter all that much. I have a hard time trusting things that I can't see or touch. And I have a hard time trusting developers who can't explain to me what I'm trying to figure out, because it's their problem, right? It's not mine. Of course, it's mine. Have you ever had to explain to somebody something and you realize you have to come up with a phrase, you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, and you don't really want to admit that it might be you? So we were talking about this, Waldo and I were. It's a gap in understanding. Gap in understanding means I can't explain it to you and you can't understand it, so why don't we just agree that I'm going to do this thing and magic stuff will happen? Okay, perfect. Executives are like that. Okay, so what do you want to learn? This is what killed me in the beginning. I couldn't believe the amount of stuff that I had to have. It was like swimming, it was like bees buzzing around my head. There's so many things that had to be learned. And so attacking this was a perfect example of me wading in, getting confused, and going away. It took me 5 times of wading in, getting confused, and coming back to really kind of sort of get an angle on this. Well, here's what I want to do. I want to take you through and give you a quick view of each and every one of the things that I had to go through, and I've checked this with a lot of people. This is my probably 8th presentation on this, and I always make changes to the slides afterwards. Don't worry about taking notes, because there's a lot of links in here. You email me, I'll give you the slides. No problem. You can have all the links, and they're all live. But what you can do is the people who are, of course it's not you, you all know DevOps, right? Okay, yes. But if you have somebody you're trying to get into it, or you're trying to bring them up right, you can just give them this deck or feed it to them slowly, and they can work their way through it. Okay? So here we go. Here's the journey. Learn to code. Okay? Absolutely everything is code. My code looks suspiciously like the English language. Because it is. I write words. I do books. I do a lot of talks. I do a lot of blog articles and things like that. I like to explain difficult things to people in ways that they can understand, mostly. Okay, learn any language. How many of you would suggest that you start with Fortran? I did. I didn't know any different. I'm like, damn, this stuff is hard. Okay, Python? Yeah, okay. Usually, there's all kinds of coding resources out there, so use them. Okay, I'm giving you the places to go here. You will see a certain amount of Linux Academy stuff in there because we are nothing if not subtle where I work. So I'm a training architect for Linux Academy. I have a good time putting this stuff together. And I've thrown some of our easier to a lot of the beginner courses in here. But I always give somebody else a chance as well. So do you know Linux? Okay, anybody not know Linux? I can't see. Okay, all right, no problem with that. When I was doing classes for Salesforce not too long ago, they were transitioning all their Windows developers over to Linux. This was a large group of people who were professionals and they knew what they were doing, but they didn't know the platform. And it was a real eye-opener for me because I'm like, everybody knows Linux. No, they don't. It's okay. So how do you explain it to folks? Okay. So most of the cloud is Linux. Go to Linux Academy. It's right there in the name. It's a good hint. LPI, I've been a director for LPI. It's a great place to start. Go to the Linux Foundation. Everybody's got courses. Just start learning. Start with the simple sysadmin course and go from there. Networking. So one of the best descriptions I've ever heard is networking is now becoming something that we do completely in code. And now it's not all completely in code because you got to have the physical wires. Back to that explaining to the boss that something, there has to be physical stuff for virtual stuff to go over it. And then they say, well, what about wireless? I don't know. Yeah, it's still there. Never mind. Don't do that one, okay? But it's important that you understand the concept of this. It's important as a developer that you know a certain amount of networking. Otherwise, you become dependent upon people who know networking as opposed to working and collaborating with people about how networking is done. It's also a good thing to really know. What about security? Okay, security, super critical stuff. What was the two talks previous? I was talking about the stuff with Equifax and things like that. It's the nightmare these days. I mean, what must it be like to have a situation like that go down? That sinking feeling, only 36 million users of a sinking feeling kind of thing, right? So you don't want to be that memo. Have you ever read that memo? You know the one I'm talking about that says, thou shalt never do X ever, ever, ever again. And everybody in the cube farm pops up and looks at Bill. It's you, dude. You're the one who did it. My favorite one ever, just slide aside, I was teaching a bunch of police and, was it Department of Energy and FBI in Las Vegas. They were taking a Linux class because they were using a tool to do forensics on suspects' computers. And one of the guys starts laughing in the back. And I said, what is it, Bill? I should have known. It's always a guy named Bill. Sorry, Bills. But Bill's laughing, and he said, we just got a memo, department-wide, the entire PD, that you're not allowed to T-hook a full cement truck. Now, you know what a T-hook is? That's where you pull up next to them and you hook over like that, and you force them off the road. Well, they did that, but the cement truck weighed about 18 times as much as the vehicle, and it ran the vehicle over. Two very upset, rather disturbed, and somewhat scratched up police officers in there. It dragged the Christmas tree off the top of the vehicle, crushed the front, crushed the back. So Bill, being Bill, takes a couple seconds, gathers himself, and writes a system company-wide, PD-wide reply that says, okay, then can we T-hook an empty cement truck? Okay, so don't be the subject of that memo. I have been standing next to people who did bad things and didn't have proof that they didn't do those bad things and got fired. I'm always the guy standing there with a bunch of printed out emails going, just waiting, got my records. Okay. All right, so scripting. Now, I call scripting like a glue gun, okay? And I like to think of myself as like a human glue gun, trying to put stuff together for people, right? Trying to explain difficult topics, trying to make things that are difficult more understandable. This is exactly what we're talking about. I saw a scripting module that somebody did the other day, and the way that they introduced scripting, the way that it ought to be, according to them, was they did cat, redirect, and then a file name, and then typed a bunch of commands separated by semicolons in one big long line, and then Control-D'd it at the end. And I'm like, dude, I'm not even mad, I'm disappointed. Like, don't introduce them like that. Teach them what the hash spling is. Teach them how to write something, Teach them VI, teach them an editor. Oops, I let that one out of the bag, didn't I? Okay, all right. So, because scripts are a big time saver, and you can typically, as a sysadmin, can kind of transition yourself into writing some code by learning how to write really good scripts. The other thing, as a sysadmin and somebody who gets on other people's systems and reads other people's YAML files and code, is you have to understand what they were trying to do, or try to. It's not always easy, okay? So we have some really good scripting modules. There's a great course about this that I always send people to. If you're trying to figure that out, it's a good place to start, okay? That's a great Medium article as well. Okay, app services. So what are you doing? You're serving services, right? How many of you have a container that all it does is serve some particular thing to a set of users or whatever? That's really the concept of what we're trying to do. Okay, we're trying to do the same thing over and over and over again, right? We've got all the databases, Redis, and all that. It took me forever to figure out why I would use Redis. It's like, okay, this is one of those things where somebody has to explain it to me, and all the people who explained it to me didn't do a good job. Not for me. So I finally figured out what it was. I'm like, oh, okay. It's like a big linear calculator. Yeah, that's it. Okay, sure. Some of you are going, dude, I'm so disappointed. Sorry. Okay. You have to understand what the servers are. Deployments. This is where it really gets to be interesting, because deploying an app to the cloud, you got to figure out what platform you're going to use. You got to figure out what all the steps are, and you got to have it a success, and then you got to be able to replicate that success to a bunch of other systems. Okay, there's some really good tutorials out here. I put the 2 Amazon ones here. If you're an Azure person, that's cool. There's Google stuff for this, but I had to pick these 2. And these are the ones that I used. And there's some really good tutorials out there. As a matter of fact, we hired one of the guys who wrote one of these tutorials. So you never know. Okay, so deploying apps is a big deal. Deploying apps reliably and making them exactly the same is a really big deal. GitHub. Okay, I have seen people just crash and burn trying to understand GitHub and Git and how it works, okay? So there's this guy out there that I found in my search for trying to figure out how to get people who didn't understand the concept of source control. And I go back to CVN and SVN, and it's like, Okay, so how do I describe this? There's this great guy, GitHub for Poets, and I've talked to him. He's wacky. He's crazy. He does all kinds of stuff and draws on the whiteboard constantly and all that. But what he does that was really important is he does not teach you with code. He leaves the code completely out of it, and all of a sudden, it's understandable. You're like, well, why didn't somebody do that before? Because every single other example I've ever seen is now we've got a piece of code we're going to write, and then we're going to check it into GitHub. Now we're going to do a pull request. He does it with songs and poems, and all of a sudden it's like, well, why didn't you say so before? Got it? So it works. And besides, he's a lot of fun to watch. He's just a madman. Really is. Okay, YAML. Sorry for the joke there, little YAML, do you? If you don't get that, it's okay. I'm old. So most of the configuration files that we work with these days are YAML or JSON. Okay. Is there a war going on there? YAML's awesome, JSON sucks, back and forth. Okay, so it's a way that you define everything. Okay, it's got to be just right. Tabs are evil, only spaces, and just think of it as a baking recipe. Now, this was tough for me because I actually am a cook, and I have worked in kitchens, and I have been successful. No, I'm not a chef, but I use it. But I actually know how to cook by taste. And I always kind of was like, I don't want to bake stuff because, once you commit, you're done, right? If it turns out, great. Then you can replicate it. If it doesn't turn out, you screwed up, it's your fault, whatever. This is very much like baking. It's fire and forget. And then burn it down and fire and forget it slightly different. And if it works, great, keep that, and now you can replicate it. So you can't just go and stir in a little extra salt. You can't do that with dough that's already baking, right? So think of it that way. That helps a lot. Get a great editor. So I don't know, this is another one of those ones. I will not mention VI, I will not mention VI, I will not mention VI. So, So you got Atom, you got VSCode, you got Sublime. I just threw some up here. It's a great way to just go out and take a look at them. Go get this person's opinion about what's the best code editor out there. I actually use VSCode quite a bit now. Love that markdown mode, or the preview mode. It's great. I do a lot of markdown that has to show up exactly right. So, like again, I said, I don't write code, but I write a bunch of stuff that would appear to be code that has to show up right in descriptions for videos, etc. Okay? So, and they all have the emulation modules. Okay? What was it? Somebody said one time that Emacs is a great operating system looking for a good editor. So we have a couple of Emacs folks in the office, and it's just like, no, stop! Don't tell me about your modules. I don't care. I just don't hurt me with the modules, please. Configuration management. Okay, you've got all the different options here. I won't spend too much time on this, but I tell you one that is starting to pop up more and more and more, which is Salt. Are you familiar with Salt Stack? Yeah. One guy. Yes. Well, it's starting to happen more and more. SUSE is using Salt in their SUSE Manager product these days. There's some sort of Salt Lake connection thing there. Anyway, Salt Stack, Salt Lake, Big Salt Lake. Okay, you got it. But it's all interesting, and it's basically pick one and go with it. Or join a company and use whatever one it is that they use, right? Okay, so the cloud providers, pretty straightforward. So when you look at the big three, about 3 years ago, was this any different? Yeah, it was. So Amazon has become this gigantic, monster that is eating the rest of everything, except for the fact that Azure's getting really big, and there's a lot of movement there, and Google. So I don't really know how to pick the one. It's usually already been picked. But you have to go in and study it and, read all the help and go to classes and everything else. I like to use the one that is already running a large infrastructure, mostly because all the decisions have been made. Okay? So you typically see people looking at AWS as the market leader. Anybody been to a reInvent show? Anybody going this year? Okay. reInvent used to eat our entire company. I have 1,500 people now, and how many people went? 1,400? Something like that to reInvent. It's just insane. Everybody that I knew in the company would go to reInvent. I don't see the same thing happening for Google Cloud or the Azure yet. I am very proud as a ex-SUSE employee that the SUSE product is very heavily featured in the Azure cloud. So it just happens to be there. All right, so monitoring. Waldo, wave at everybody. Waldo's with Datadog. I used to work for Datadog. Great company, great product. Okay, go off and take a look at the datadoghq.com. That's Matt and the other folks over there who do all those courses. You can get the courses for free, and it does work. It works well. There are other products. New Relic? New Relic, anybody? Okay, one of the show sponsors. All right, thank you. So the honorable competition there. I don't work for either one of them now, so have at it. All right, so containers and orchestration. What do you need to do? You need to understand Docker and Kubernetes. Now, what's a great way to go learn these? There's a company called Katacoda. Anybody seen Katacoda? Anybody worked with Katacoda at all? Yeah, I know you do. Introduced them. Katacoda is a pretty cool company. They got a lot of learning stuff out there. And then also there's a really nice set of 81 courses on our product, linuxacademy.com, about the different cloud products. So that's it's a set of learning tracks that are out there. And I'm pretty sure that there are some that are in the free set as well. If you register with us, you get X number of courses for free. So go explore that. Have a good time with it. Let me wrap up. And what I really want to tell you is, as an old dog, relatively, let's not get too, don't laugh. But as an old dog, it was hard for me to learn these new tricks. It wasn't easy. And it was humbling, to say the least, to have to go and ask people for help in understanding about stuff. I think it's the concept that's harder than the actuality of it. If you can go and look at something that already works, how many of you feel more comfortable looking at something that works and reverse engineering it than having to, see, that's the way I am. I'm like, just give me the stuff to type and pretty soon I'll figure it out. But I need to see the concept first. And so getting the concept of where you're trying to go, I think is the most important piece of that. So, and in that wonderful inspirational way of if a big fuzzy sysadmin like me can do it and transition over to this, any of you can do it, right? Yeah, I think you can. So here's what I want to offer you, and that is if you find any of this stuff useful, send me an email. I'll be happy to send you the slides, ross@brunson.org. And all these pictures that were in here are taken by me, and they're of my valley, Paradise Valley. The Paradise Valley. Forget that one in Arizona. Yeah, not good. So thank you, and I appreciate it.